Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a world filled with magnificent cities, crowded marketplaces, towering temples, and civilizations so powerful that their people believed they would last forever. Tonight, however, we will explore a quieter and more unsettling story. History often teaches us about the rise of great societies. We learn about kings, victories, inventions, and monuments. Yet, scattered across the ancient world are places where entire civilizations seem to vanish with astonishing speed. One generation lived among bustling streets. The next generation found silence. Massive buildings remained. The people did not. From the Bronze Age kingdoms of the Mediterranean to forgotten cities hidden beneath jungle canopies and drifting desert sands, countless communities experienced moments when everything changed far faster than anyone expected. So settle in comfortably as we travel through centuries of forgotten lives and discover how ancient civilizations disappeared almost overnight. The evening sun hung low above the eastern Mediterranean. Merchants guided heavily loaded donkeys along dusty roads. Fishing boats drifted toward familiar harbors. Farmers finished their work beneath skies that looked no different from countless evenings before. For most people living around the year 1300 BCE, the world appeared stable. Powerful kingdoms dominated the landscape. Trade routes stretched across thousands of miles. Ships carried copper, tin, ivory, wine, grain, textiles, and luxury goods between distant ports. Messages traveled between rulers who considered themselves masters of a sophisticated international world. Among these great powers stood kingdoms whose names survive in history books today. The Egyptians controlled immense territories along the Nile. The Hittites governed large regions of Anatolia. The Mycenaeans ruled wealthy centers throughout Greece. Smaller states prospered between them, benefiting from trade and diplomacy. To an observer living during this period, civilization may have seemed permanent. Generations had grown accustomed to prosperity. Palaces managed agricultural production. Officials recorded taxes. Craftsmen produced beautiful objects. Religious ceremonies reinforced social order. Most people expected tomorrow to resemble yesterday. Yet beneath this appearance of stability, unseen pressures slowly accumulated. The ancient world depended upon remarkably complex connections. Bronze tools required copper and tin. These metals often came from different regions. Trade networks linked distant societies together. If disruptions occurred in one area, consequences spread outward. Harvest failures in one kingdom could influence neighboring economies. Political instability could interrupt trade routes. Conflicts between rulers could affect thousands of ordinary families. The system functioned efficiently. It also possessed hidden vulnerabilities. Few people recognized them. Why would they? Complex societies often appear strongest shortly before periods of crisis. warning signs remain difficult to interpret. An unusually poor harvest seems temporary. Political disagreements appear manageable. Economic difficulties look solvable. Life continues. Markets remain open. Children play. Religious festivals proceed. People adapt. Then eventually, enough problems overlap. The balance changes. Across the eastern Mediterranean, evidence suggests that multiple challenges emerged during the late Bronze Age. Some regions experienced drought. Others faced migrations. Political tensions increased. Trade networks became less reliable. Local conflicts intensified. Each problem alone might have been survivable. Together, they formed something more dangerous. Imagine a merchant whose livelihood depends upon imported materials. When shipments arrive late, business suffers. When delays continue, customers disappear. When trade collapses entirely, survival becomes uncertain. Now imagine thousands of similar disruptions occurring simultaneously across multiple kingdoms. The effects spread gradually at first, then more rapidly. Archaeologists studying this period frequently uncover signs of abrupt change. Magnificent palaces burned. Administrative centers ceased functioning. Records ended. Entire urban regions declined. Some settlements were abandoned completely. Others shrank dramatically. The transformation unfolded over decades rather than a single night. Yet, for individuals experiencing it, events may have felt shockingly sudden. A person born during prosperity could reach middle age surrounded by instability. Children who expected comfortable futures inherited uncertainty instead. One famous example emerged in Mycenaean Greece. For centuries, powerful palace centers coordinated economic activity throughout the region. Administrators tracked goods using writing systems. Elite families accumulated wealth. Monumental architecture reflected authority and organization. Then many palace complexes suffered destruction. The reasons remain debated. Earthquakes may have contributed. Conflict likely played a role. Economic disruption added further difficulties. Whatever combination occurred, the old system failed. Without centralized administration, society transformed. Trade declined. Writing disappeared from everyday use. Population patterns changed. The world people knew dissolved. Imagine waking one morning after years of growing instability. The local palace no longer functions. Officials no longer collect records. Regional trade no longer operates normally. Security becomes uncertain. Traditional institutions disappear. For ordinary families, such changes could feel almost unimaginable. History often focuses upon rulers, yet these transitions affected countless anonymous individuals. Farmers still needed food. Parents still cared for children. Communities still sought safety. Life continued despite uncertainty. Across the sea, similar transformations unfolded elsewhere. Cities that once connected distant cultures struggled to maintain their previous importance. Economic relationships weakened, political structures fractured, regional identities shifted. The interconnected Bronze Age world gradually unraveled. Modern historians sometimes call this process the Bronze Age collapse. The phrase sounds dramatic. For those living through it, the experience was likely confusing rather than dramatic. People rarely know they are witnessing the end of an era. They simply notice familiar routines becoming increasingly difficult. Prices rise, travel becomes dangerous, authorities appear weaker, opportunities diminish. The future grows harder to predict. Years pass, then one day people realize the old world has vanished. What makes this story especially fascinating is that many survivors adapted. Civilization did not end. Instead, societies reorganized. New cultures emerged. Different political systems developed. History moved forward. Yet the disappearance of the previous order remained profound. The ruins stood as reminders. Collapsed walls marked former centers of power. Abandoned buildings testified to changing circumstances. Generations later, descendants could still see traces of what had been lost. As darkness settled over the Mediterranean landscape, families gathered around fires. Some discussed harvests, others worried about rumors from distant regions. Many likely believed difficulties would eventually pass. After all, prosperous societies had endured challenges before. Why should this time be different? Unfortunately, history often reveals that major transformations become visible only after they occur. The people experiencing them rarely possess clear perspectives. They live within events rather than above them. And so, while kingdoms struggled across the Mediterranean world, another story was beginning far away in a place where enormous stone cities rose from dense forests. There, a different civilization would eventually confront its own mysterious decline. For now, however, the people living among those distant jungles remained unaware that their future would one day puzzle historians for centuries. And as the ancient Mediterranean entered an age of uncertainty, the forests across the ocean continued whispering beneath moonlit skies, quietly sheltering one of history's greatest civilizations before its long journey toward disappearance had even begun. And as the ancient Mediterranean entered an age of uncertainty, the forests across the ocean continued whispering beneath moonlit skies, quietly sheltering one of history's greatest civilizations before its long journey toward disappearance had even begun. For centuries, the tropical lowlands of Central America echoed with sounds very different from those of the Mediterranean world. Dense jungles stretched across vast distances. Rivers wound through thick vegetation. Exotic birds filled the canopy with calls that carried through the humid air. Hidden among these forests stood cities of remarkable sophistication. Stone temples rose above the trees. Wide plazas accommodated thousands of people. Monuments recorded the achievements of rulers. Astronomers carefully tracked movements across the heavens. Scribes carved intricate inscriptions into stone. This was the world of the Maya. Unlike many civilizations connected through large empires, the Maya organized themselves through networks of city-states. Each major center possessed its own rulers, traditions, and political ambitions. Sometimes they cooperated. Frequently, they competed. Occasionally, they fought. Yet, despite rivalries, they shared important cultural foundations that united the broader civilization. For generations, prosperity expanded. Population increased. Cities grew larger. Construction projects transformed landscapes. Agricultural systems supported millions of people. The future appeared promising. At sunrise, farmers walked toward cultivated fields. Nobles prepared for ceremonies. Craftsmen shaped stone and pottery. Children learned customs that seemed timeless. The rhythms of daily life felt permanent. Many ancient societies developed this sense of permanence. When buildings endure for centuries, people naturally assume they will continue standing forever. When institutions survive generation after generation, they appear unshakable. Yet history repeatedly demonstrates how fragile even successful systems can become. The Maya achieved extraordinary accomplishments. Their understanding of astronomy impressed later observers. Their architecture transformed difficult environments into thriving urban centers. Their writing system preserved complex historical records. Their artistic achievements reflected remarkable creativity. By nearly every measure, they represented a flourishing civilization. But success often creates new challenges. Large populations require reliable food supplies. Monumental construction demands resources. Political competition encourages ambitious projects. Growing societies become increasingly dependent upon stability. Small disruptions remain manageable. Large disruptions become dangerous. For centuries, Maya rulers strengthened their prestige through visible displays of power. Monuments celebrated victories. Temples honored gods. Public ceremonies reinforced authority. Each generation inherited expectations established by those before them. Leaders needed success. Success required resources. Resources depended upon environmental conditions and social cooperation. The system functioned effectively, while those elements remained balanced. Gradually, however, signs of strain began appearing. Not all regions experienced difficulties simultaneously. Some cities continued thriving. Others encountered increasing problems. Evidence suggests environmental pressures played a significant role. Periods of drought may have reduced agricultural productivity. Water supplies became less reliable. Food production faced growing challenges. In modern societies, people often respond to shortages through transportation networks capable of moving resources across great distances. Ancient civilizations possessed fewer options. When local conditions deteriorated, consequences could become severe. Imagine a farming community dependent upon seasonal rainfall. One poor year creates hardship. 2 poor years generate concern. Several consecutive difficult years threaten survival. Families begin making difficult choices. Communities experience tension. Political leaders face growing pressure. Meanwhile, rival cities continue pursuing their own interests. Conflict becomes more likely precisely when cooperation is most needed. Archaeologists studying Maya history have uncovered evidence suggesting warfare intensified during certain periods. Fortifications appeared in some locations. Defensive concerns increased. Political rivalries became more serious as environmental difficulties expanded. Competition for resources may have become increasingly important. The exact sequence remains debated. History rarely provides simple explanations. Civilizations rarely disappear because of a single cause. Instead, multiple pressures often interact. Environmental challenges combine with political instability. Economic problems overlap with social tensions. Together, they create conditions that become increasingly difficult to manage. Within Maya cities, ordinary residents may not have fully understood broader developments. Most people focus primarily upon local concerns. They care about families, neighbors, harvests, and immediate responsibilities. The larger picture emerges slowly. A farmer notices lower yields. A merchant observes declining trade. A craftsman receives fewer commissions. Each individual experiences only part of the transformation. Yet collectively, these changes signal deeper problems. Years passed, then decades. Some cities remained active. Others declined. Construction projects slowed in certain regions. Monuments became less frequent. Political authority weakened. Population patterns shifted. People gradually left some urban centers. The process was not uniform. It unfolded differently across various locations. That complexity makes the Maya decline one of history's most fascinating puzzles. Popular imagination sometimes envisions entire cities suddenly abandoned overnight. Reality appears more gradual. Yet, from the perspective of future generations, the results looked astonishing. Magnificent urban centers eventually stood nearly empty. Temples remained. Palaces survived. Stone monuments endured. Large populations no longer occupied them. Nature slowly advanced. Roots pushed through cracks. Vegetation spread across plazas. Trees emerged among former streets. The jungle reclaimed spaces once filled with human activity. Imagine returning to a city decades after leaving. Structures still stand. Familiar landmarks remain visible, yet silence dominates. No crowded marketplaces, no ceremonial gatherings, no busy construction projects, only wind moving through vegetation. Such scenes must have felt deeply unsettling for later explorers encountering these ruins centuries afterward. The mystery became even greater. How could societies capable of such achievements decline so dramatically? Where had the people gone? What events transformed thriving cities into abandoned monuments? The answers proved complicated. Many Maya communities survived. Their descendants continue living today. The civilization did not vanish entirely. Rather, major urban centers in certain regions experienced significant decline. Population redistributed. Political structures changed. Cultural traditions adapted. Life continued in different forms. This distinction matters. History often describes civilizations disappearing, when reality involves transformation rather than complete extinction. People persist, cultures evolve, communities relocate. The visible symbols of power may fade, while human stories continue. Still, for those witnessing the decline of great Maya cities, the experience likely felt profound. Generations had invested labor, faith, and identity into these urban centers. Temples represented collective achievements. Monuments preserved memories. Public spaces connected communities. Watching such places lose vitality must have been emotionally difficult. Night after night, fewer lights illuminated plazas. More buildings fell into disrepair. Familiar routines disappeared. Gradually, the balance shifted. The forest moved closer. Human activity moved farther away. And somewhere among those changing landscapes, families carried traditions into new communities while leaving behind stone cities that would one day astonish the world. Long after many Maya urban centers declined, travelers from distant lands would encounter ruins hidden beneath vegetation and struggle to imagine how vast populations once lived there. Yet the story of disappearing civilizations was far from over. Beyond the jungles of Central America, across deserts and mountains, another society was approaching a moment when prosperity would give way to sudden uncertainty. Its city stood beside rivers. Its wealth depended upon trade. Its people believed their world was secure. They could not yet know that within a relatively short span of time, entire urban centers would fall silent, leaving future generations searching for answers among the ruins. And so, as moonlight filtered through the jungle canopy, and ancient Maya temples stood watch over empty plazas, the story continued toward another civilization whose fate would become one of history's most haunting mysteries. And so, as moonlight filtered through the jungle canopy, and ancient Maya temples stood watch over empty plazas, the story continued toward another civilization whose fate would become one of history's most haunting mysteries. Thousands of years before historians began debating the decline of the Maya, another remarkable civilization flourished along the banks of a mighty river in what is now modern Pakistan and northwestern India. The river systems provided water. The fertile soil supported agriculture. Trade routes connected distant regions. Cities emerged with an astonishing degree of organization. Today, we know this civilization as the Indus Valley Civilization. For centuries, its people built communities that appeared remarkably advanced. Their cities contained carefully planned streets. Drainage systems carried wastewater away from homes. Standardized weights facilitated commerce. Craftsmen produced jewelry, pottery, and tools that traveled far beyond local markets. The civilization spread across an enormous area. Its influence reached hundreds of settlements. Unlike many ancient societies, however, it left behind fewer obvious clues about kings, battles, or powerful rulers. Its writing system remains largely undeciphered. As a result, much of its story remains hidden, yet the archaeological evidence reveals enough to paint a fascinating picture. Imagine waking before dawn in one of its major cities. The air feels cool. Merchants prepare goods for market. Workers begin daily routines. Families move through streets designed with surprising precision. Water flows through carefully engineered systems. The city functions smoothly. Generations have lived this way. Children grow up assuming their world will continue unchanged. That assumption is nearly universal throughout history. Most people rarely imagine the disappearance of the society surrounding them. Even when difficulties arise, they expect solutions. When harvests fail, next year may improve. When trade slows, recovery seems possible. When political problems emerge, leaders eventually respond. Civilizations often persist through challenges. The people of the Indus Valley likely felt similar confidence. Their urban centers had endured for centuries. Their networks extended across vast territories. Trade connected them to distant lands. Evidence suggests merchants exchanged goods with regions as far away as Mesopotamia. Ships crossed coastal waters. Caravans traveled inland routes. Economic life remained active. The future appeared secure. Yet beneath the surface, changes gradually emerged. Environmental conditions shifted. Rivers altered their courses. Rainfall patterns may have changed over time. The natural systems supporting large populations became less predictable. Modern observers sometimes underestimate the importance of rivers. In ancient societies, a river is not merely water. It represents transportation, agriculture, communication, trade, food production. Entire ways of life depend upon it. When river systems behave differently, communities must adapt. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes the challenge becomes overwhelming. Researchers studying the Indus Valley Civilization have proposed several explanations for its decline. Environmental changes appear significant. Some river channels may have dried or shifted away from established settlements. Agricultural productivity may have suffered. Economic networks may have weakened. Population patterns gradually changed. Unlike dramatic stories involving invasions or sudden destruction, the archaeological evidence often suggests a quieter process. Cities slowly lost population. Urban life diminished. Communities relocated. The transformation unfolded across generations. Yet, for individuals experiencing these developments, the effects could still feel dramatic. Imagine living in a thriving city where fewer traders arrive each year. Market activity decreases. Maintenance of public infrastructure becomes inconsistent. Families begin leaving. Vacant buildings appear. Economic opportunities shrink. The city remains standing, but something essential has changed. The confidence that once defined daily life begins fading. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Indus Valley decline is the relative absence of widespread evidence for catastrophic warfare. Many ancient collapses are associated with destruction layers, burned cities, and signs of conflict. Here, the story seems more subtle. That subtlety reminds us that civilizations do not always disappear amid spectacular disasters. Sometimes they simply become unsustainable. Gradually, people move elsewhere. Institutions weaken. Urban centers lose importance. The transformation may appear slow from a historical perspective, yet when measured against human lives, it can occur surprisingly quickly. A grandparent remembers prosperity. A grandchild inherits a very different reality. Generations who once viewed cities as permanent begin adapting to new circumstances. Communities reorganize. People pursue opportunities elsewhere. Former centers of power become quieter. Eventually, they become ruins. Archaeologists exploring sites such as Harappa and Mohenjo-daro encounter evidence of extraordinary planning and organization. The scale impresses modern observers. The sophistication surprises many visitors. These cities were not primitive settlements struggling to survive. They represented highly developed urban environments. That fact makes their decline especially intriguing. If such capable societies could transform so dramatically, what does that reveal about civilization itself? Perhaps one lesson is humility. Human societies depend upon countless interconnected factors: stable environments, reliable resources, economic cooperation, social trust, political organization. When enough of those elements weaken simultaneously, even successful civilizations become vulnerable. The people living through such transitions rarely understand the full picture. They simply navigate changing circumstances one day at a time. A farmer notices unusual weather patterns. A merchant experiences declining trade. A craftsman searches for customers. Life continues despite uncertainty. The broader transformation remains difficult to recognize until much later, as centuries passed. Many urban centers of the Indus Valley Civilization faded from prominence. Some communities persisted, others relocated. The civilization changed shape. Its great cities no longer dominated the landscape as they once had. Eventually, wind carried dust across abandoned structures. Walls weathered beneath the sun. Nature slowly reclaimed spaces built by human hands. The silence arrived gradually. Yet when later generations encountered the remains, the result seemed astonishing. Entire cities stood where bustling populations once lived. Wide streets stretched through empty spaces. Drainage systems survived long after the communities that constructed them. The physical evidence remained. The voices did not. For thousands of years, many of these ruins rested quietly beneath layers of earth. Empires rose and fell elsewhere. New religions spread. Trade routes shifted. Entire historical eras passed. Meanwhile, the remnants of one of humanity's earliest urban civilizations waited patiently to be rediscovered. When archaeologists eventually uncovered these sites, they revealed a forgotten chapter of history. A civilization that once seemed permanent had transformed so completely that its memory largely disappeared. That realization carries a strange feeling, not merely sadness, not merely curiosity, something deeper. It reminds us how temporary even the most impressive achievements can be. Cities appear eternal. History repeatedly proves otherwise. The people of the Indus Valley did not know future generations would puzzle over their disappearance. They simply lived ordinary lives. They worried about food, family, work, weather, and community. The same concerns shared by countless people throughout history. Then circumstances changed. The world they knew slowly transformed, and eventually, the great cities became echoes of a distant age. Yet even as the Indus Valley settlements faded, other civilizations elsewhere continued thriving. Far to the west, enormous monuments cast long shadows across desert sands. River floods nourished fertile fields. Powerful rulers governed one of the most famous civilizations in human history. For centuries, it appeared nearly invincible. Its monuments seemed destined to outlast time itself. And while many ancient societies vanished completely from memory, this civilization survived long enough to witness the rise and fall of countless neighbors. Even so, it too would experience moments when its stability came dangerously close to unraveling. As dawn approached over the deserts of northeastern Africa, the waters of a great river flowed steadily toward the sea, carrying with them the next chapter in the story of civilizations that discovered how quickly permanence can become an illusion. As dawn approached over the deserts of northeastern Africa, waters of a great river flowed steadily toward the sea, carrying with them the next chapter in the story of civilizations that discovered how quickly permanence can become an illusion. For thousands of years, the Nile River served as the lifeblood of one of history's most recognizable civilizations. Each year, its waters flooded surrounding lands. Rich soil nourished crops. Harvests sustained communities. Villages expanded into towns. Towns grew into cities. Monuments rose above the landscape. Generations lived and died beneath the gaze of colossal statues and towering temples. This was the world of ancient Egypt. To many people living elsewhere, Egypt seemed eternal. Its rulers commanded vast resources. Its architecture inspired awe. Its traditions stretched backward through centuries. Foreign visitors often viewed the kingdom as ancient even during their own lifetimes. When societies endure for thousands of years, they begin to appear permanent. The pyramids themselves encouraged that belief. Their massive stone blocks projected stability. Their scale suggested endurance beyond imagination. Standing before such structures, it became easy to believe that Egypt would continue forever. Yet permanence is one of history's greatest illusions. Even civilizations that survive for millennia experience periods of extraordinary vulnerability. The Egypt remembered in popular imagination often appears as a single, continuous civilization. Reality was far more complicated. Its long history contained moments of prosperity, crisis, fragmentation, recovery, and transformation. Several times, the kingdom nearly unraveled. One particularly fascinating example emerged near the end of what historians call the Old Kingdom. For generations, powerful rulers had overseen monumental construction projects. The state functioned effectively. Agriculture supported large populations. Officials managed resources. Society appeared stable. Then conditions began changing. The Nile's annual floods may have become less reliable. Harvests suffered. Food supplies faced increasing pressure. Economic difficulties spread. When agricultural systems weaken, the consequences extend far beyond farms. Officials collect fewer taxes. Governments struggle to maintain authority. Communities experience tension. Confidence begins eroding. The ancient Egyptians depended profoundly upon the Nile. Its predictable flooding represented more than a natural event. It formed the foundation of society itself. People planned their lives around it. Religious beliefs reflected its importance. Economic systems depended upon its regular behavior. When the river failed to meet expectations, uncertainty followed. Imagine being a farmer watching water levels remain lower than usual. At first, concern remains limited. Perhaps next year will improve. Then another disappointing flood arrives. And another. Gradually, anxiety spreads through entire communities. The consequences become impossible to ignore. Food shortages affect ordinary households. Prices rise. Competition increases. Local authorities struggle to respond. What once seemed temporary begins appearing more serious. Historical records from later periods hint at difficult times. Accounts describe disorder. Central authority weakened. Regional leaders gained influence. The unity that had characterized earlier centuries became less secure. The transformation did not occur in a single dramatic moment. Rather, it unfolded through a series of interconnected challenges. Yet, from the perspective of those experiencing it, the results may have felt surprisingly sudden. One generation inherited stability. The next inherited uncertainty. A recurring pattern emerges throughout history. Civilizations often appear strongest shortly before significant disruptions. Their institutions have functioned successfully for so long that few imagine alternatives. The possibility of major decline seems distant. Then circumstances shift. The confidence supporting the system begins disappearing. Ancient Egypt eventually recovered from these difficult periods. That fact makes its story especially valuable. Unlike some civilizations whose urban centers vanished entirely, Egypt repeatedly adapted. Its institutions evolved. Its political structures changed. New rulers emerged. Life continued. Nevertheless, the crises revealed important truths. Even powerful societies remain vulnerable. Even successful systems depend upon environmental stability. Even monumental architecture cannot guarantee political security. The pyramids endured. The society surrounding them changed. Imagine traveling through Egypt during one of these periods of uncertainty. Villages continue functioning. People still cultivate fields. Temples remain active. Yet signs of stress appear everywhere. Local leaders exercise greater authority. Economic conditions fluctuate. Rumors spread along riverbanks. No single event signals collapse. Instead, countless small changes accumulate. Eventually, the old order no longer exists. For ordinary people, such transitions can feel deeply unsettling. Most individuals build lives around assumptions of continuity. They expect familiar institutions to persist. They assume social structures will remain recognizable. When those assumptions fail, adaptation becomes necessary. Families make difficult decisions. Communities develop new arrangements. Survival requires flexibility. History often celebrates rulers and monuments. Yet these quieter stories of adaptation may be equally important. The majority of people never commanded armies or built temples. They simply responded to changing circumstances as best they could. Their resilience allowed societies to endure. As centuries passed, Egypt experienced additional periods of instability. Foreign invasions occurred. Political fragmentation emerged. Competing rulers struggled for power. The kingdom repeatedly confronted challenges. that might have destroyed less resilient civilizations. Each crisis reinforced a fundamental lesson. Survival is not guaranteed. Success in one era does not ensure success in the next. Nevertheless, Egypt's remarkable longevity sometimes obscures how close certain moments came to altering its trajectory entirely. Had environmental pressures proven more severe, had political divisions lasted longer, had recovery efforts failed, history might remember Egypt very differently. Perhaps its monuments would stand as mysterious ruins abandoned centuries earlier. Perhaps future civilizations would speculate about its disappearance, just as modern historians study other vanished societies. Instead, Egypt persisted. Its story became one of repeated transformation rather than complete disappearance. That distinction highlights another important theme. Not every civilization vanishes in the same manner. Some experience sudden destruction, others decline gradually. Some fragment into smaller communities, others evolve into new cultural forms. History rarely follows simple patterns. Each case possesses unique characteristics, yet common threads often emerge. Environmental stress, economic disruption, political instability, population shifts, conflict, resource challenges. These factors appear repeatedly across different times and places. No single explanation fits every civilization, but the accumulation of multiple pressures frequently precedes major change. As evening settled over the Nile Valley, fishermen guided boats toward shore. Farmers returned from fields. Families prepared meals. Children listened to stories passed down through generations. Most people remained focused upon immediate concerns. The broader forces shaping history operated largely beyond their awareness. That reality remains true in every era. Individuals rarely perceive the full significance of events unfolding around them. Only later do historians identify turning points. At the time, life simply continues. The people of ancient Egypt could not know that thousands of years later, scholars would analyze fluctuations in river levels, study archaeological evidence, and debate the causes of various crises. They lived within history rather than observing it from afar. And while Egypt struggled through its own periods of uncertainty, another civilization far across the world was approaching an even more dramatic transformation. Its cities occupied deserts and canyons. Its people engineered impressive infrastructure. Its communities prospered in challenging environments. For generations, they adapted successfully. Then conditions changed. Water became scarcer. Resources grew harder to obtain. Entire settlements faced difficult choices. Soon, the silence that followed would leave behind some of the most haunting abandoned cities ever discovered. As darkness spread across the Nile and stars reflected upon calm waters, the story moved onward toward lands where stone dwellings clung to cliffs, and a civilization prepared to confront challenges that would test its ability to survive. As darkness spread across the Nile and stars reflected upon calm waters, the story moved onward toward lands where stone dwellings clung to cliffs, and a civilization prepared to confront challenges that would test its ability to survive. Long before European explorers arrived in North America, vast regions of the continent supported thriving communities whose achievements would later surprise archaeologists and historians alike. Among them were the ancestral Pueblo peoples, sometimes associated with remarkable settlements built into cliffs, mesas, and canyon walls throughout the American Southwest. The environment they inhabited was both beautiful and demanding. Towering sandstone formations dominated the horizon. Dry winds crossed wide landscapes. Seasonal rains determined agricultural success. Life depended upon careful planning and a deep understanding of local conditions. For generations, these communities demonstrated extraordinary adaptability. They constructed homes from stone and adobe. They developed agricultural practices suited to challenging environments. They established trade networks connecting distant regions. Ceremonial traditions strengthened social bonds. Communities flourished in places that outsiders might consider inhospitable. At sunrise, farmers walked toward carefully cultivated fields. Women prepared meals from stored crops. Children learned practical skills necessary for survival. Craftsmen produced tools, pottery, and textiles. The rhythm of daily life reflected centuries of accumulated knowledge. Nothing about these settlements suggested inevitable decline. Indeed, many of them appeared remarkably successful. One of the most famous examples survives today within the canyon systems of the American Southwest. Visitors who encounter these stone structures often experience a sense of wonder. Multi-story dwellings occupy protected alcoves beneath towering cliffs. The architecture reflects impressive planning and engineering. Even centuries later, the buildings inspire admiration. Standing before them, it becomes easy to imagine thriving communities filling every room and courtyard. Yet eventually, many of these settlements were abandoned. The reasons remain a subject of ongoing study. As with many ancient civilizations, no single explanation appears sufficient. Instead, researchers point toward a combination of environmental pressures, resource challenges, and social transformations. For generations, agricultural production supported growing populations. Corn, beans, and squash formed important foundations of life. Success depended heavily upon rainfall. When conditions remained favorable, communities prospered. When drought arrived, difficulties followed. Tree ring evidence has provided historians with remarkable insights into past climate conditions. By studying ancient wood, researchers can reconstruct patterns of rainfall extending back centuries. These studies suggest that significant droughts affected portions of the Southwest during critical periods. Imagine living in a settlement dependent upon seasonal precipitation. A dry year creates concern. Several dry years create hardship. Extended drought fundamentally alters possibilities. Food production declines. Storage reserves diminish. Communities face difficult decisions. People adapt where possible, but adaptation has limits. The challenge becomes especially serious when large populations depend upon finite resources. Agriculture requires water. Construction requires materials. Heating and cooking require fuel. As settlements expanded, pressure upon local resources increased. Forests provided timber. Nearby lands supplied building materials. Over time, obtaining these resources sometimes required traveling greater distances. Such trends may have added further strain during periods of environmental difficulty. Imagine a family discussing the future around an evening fire. Harvests have been disappointing. Supplies are lower than expected. Neighbors are considering relocation. Rumors circulate about better conditions elsewhere. No one wishes to abandon familiar homes, yet remaining may become increasingly risky. History often portrays abandonment as a sudden event. Reality is frequently more personal. Families evaluate options. Communities debate solutions. Some leave first, others remain longer. Gradually, population patterns shift. The process may take years, then decades later. Observers encounter empty settlements and wonder what happened. One of the most striking aspects of these abandoned communities is the quality of the architecture left behind. The buildings suggest organization, cooperation, and long-term planning. Their creators invested enormous effort into construction. People do not undertake such projects lightly. They build because they believe the future will justify the investment. That belief exists in every civilization, whether constructing temples, palaces, roads, or homes. People generally assume continuity. The possibility of departure seems distant, yet circumstances change. What once appeared permanent becomes temporary. Archaeologists examining these sites often find evidence of orderly departures rather than catastrophic destruction. Many structures show no signs of violent endings. Instead, it appears that residents gradually relocated. Communities moved toward areas offering more reliable opportunities. Life continued elsewhere. The settlements remained. Silence replaced activity. Consider what such a departure might have felt like. A family packs belongings accumulated across generations. They walk through rooms filled with memories. They leave behind walls built by parents and grandparents. Children ask questions about the journey ahead. Adults provide reassurance despite uncertainty. No one knows precisely what the future holds. They only know that staying has become increasingly difficult. The emotional dimension of such experiences rarely appears in archaeological evidence. Stone walls survive. Human feelings do not. Yet behind every abandoned settlement stand countless individual stories. People laughed there, worked there, celebrated there, mourned there, planned futures there. The disappearance of a community involves more than buildings. It involves lives. That reality connects ancient civilizations to modern humanity. Across time and geography, people share similar hopes and concerns. They seek security. They care for families. They invest in communities. When circumstances force change, they adapt as best they can. As centuries passed, wind swept through empty rooms once occupied by thriving households. Sand accumulated. Birds nested in forgotten spaces. The landscape gradually reclaimed what human effort had created. Travelers encountering these settlements generations later could only speculate about their history. Who built them? Why were they abandoned? Where did the people go? The answers emerged slowly through decades of archaeological research. Yet many details remain uncertain. Perhaps that uncertainty forms part of their enduring fascination. History rarely provides complete explanations. Evidence survives unevenly. Human experiences leave incomplete traces. Researchers assemble fragments and attempt to reconstruct broader narratives. Sometimes the picture becomes clear. Sometimes mysteries remain. The ancestral Pueblo communities remind us that disappearance does not necessarily mean extinction. Their descendants continue living throughout the region today. Cultural traditions endured. Communities adapted. Life moved forward. The settlements were abandoned. The people were not. This distinction appears repeatedly throughout the history of civilizations. When historians discuss collapse, they often describe transformations rather than absolute endings. Societies reorganize. Populations relocate. New forms emerge from old foundations. The visible symbols of one era fade, while new chapters begin. Still, for those witnessing such transitions firsthand, the experience likely felt profound. The departure from long-established homes represented a major turning point. Familiar landscapes remained behind. New opportunities awaited elsewhere. The future remained uncertain. And as these communities adjusted to changing circumstances, another civilization on a different continent was approaching a crisis of its own. Its cities once controlled major trade routes. Its merchants connected distant regions. Its rulers commanded impressive wealth. For centuries, prosperity seemed assured. Then a series of unexpected events disrupted the foundations of society. Within a surprisingly short period, urban centers that had flourished for generations would experience dramatic decline. Future historians would debate the causes. Future archaeologists would excavate the remains, and future generations would wonder how such successful cities could fall so quickly into silence, far beyond the deserts of the American Southwest, beneath skies illuminated by unfamiliar constellations. The next chapter in humanity's long story of disappearing civilizations was already beginning to unfold, far beyond the deserts of the American Southwest, beneath skies illuminated by unfamiliar constellations. The next chapter in humanity's long story of disappearing civilizations was already beginning to unfold along the western coast of South America, where vast deserts met the waters of the Pacific Ocean. Powerful civilizations rose in environments that demanded constant ingenuity. At first glance, the landscape appeared unforgiving. Rainfall remained scarce. Large stretches of land seemed unsuitable for dense populations. Yet rivers flowing down from the Andes Mountains transformed narrow valleys into fertile corridors. Communities learned to harness these precious resources. Agriculture flourished where conditions allowed. Trade connected coastal settlements with distant highland regions. Over centuries, complex societies emerged. Among them stood civilizations whose achievements rivaled many of the ancient worlds already explored in our story. Long before the rise of the famous Inca Empire, earlier cultures built cities, roads, temples, and irrigation systems across these challenging landscapes. One particularly remarkable example was the civilization centered around the city of Chan Chan, capital of the Chimu Kingdom. At its height, Chan Chan became one of the largest cities in the ancient Americas. Its adobe walls stretched across enormous areas. Its rulers controlled extensive territories. Its craftsmen produced sophisticated works of art. Its administrators governed large populations. To those living within its walls, the city likely seemed destined to endure. Every morning, workers passed through bustling districts. Merchants exchanged goods. Officials supervised economic activities. Fishermen returned from the ocean. Farmers cultivated irrigated fields. Life followed familiar rhythms. The city functioned because countless individuals performed ordinary tasks day after day. Like all great civilizations, its strength depended not only upon rulers, but also upon ordinary people. For generations, this system worked remarkably well, yet success often encourages expansion. Expansion creates new dependencies. The larger a society becomes, the more resources it requires, the more interconnected its systems become, the more vulnerable it may be to disruption. One environmental force proved especially important along the Pacific coast of South America. Today it is known as El Niño. This climatic phenomenon can dramatically alter weather patterns. In some years, heavy rains arrive where little rainfall normally occurs. Flooding damages infrastructure. Agricultural systems suffer. Communities face unexpected challenges. For civilizations dependent upon upon carefully managed environments, such disruptions can become serious. Imagine a city designed for dry conditions suddenly experiencing unusually intense rainfall. Canals overflow, buildings weaken, fields become damaged, transportation becomes difficult, economic activity slows. The effects extend far beyond the initial storms. Recovery demands labor, resources, and time. Researchers believe environmental disturbances contributed to difficulties faced by several Andean societies. The exact details vary from region to region. As always, no single explanation fully captures the complexity of historical change. Environmental challenges interacted with political tensions, economic pressures combined with external threats. Multiple factors reinforced one another. Meanwhile, competition between neighboring powers intensified. Successful civilizations often attract rivals. Wealth encourages ambition. Control of resources becomes increasingly important. Conflicts emerge. Victories create opportunities. Defeats create vulnerabilities. For the Chimu kingdom, one particularly formidable rival eventually appeared in the form of the expanding Inca Empire. The Incas possessed extraordinary organizational abilities. Their influence spread across vast territories. Road systems connected distant regions. Administrative structures supported expansion. Military campaigns extended their authority. Gradually, they absorbed neighboring societies into their growing empire. The Chimu kingdom ultimately became one of those societies. Its political independence ended. Its rulers lost authority. Its administrative systems transformed. For residents of Chan Chan, such changes must have felt significant. The city itself remained. Buildings still stood. People continued living there. Yet the political world they understood had changed. History often reminds us that civilizations can disappear without every building being destroyed. Sometimes institutions vanish while physical structures remain. Sometimes cultural identities merge into larger systems. Sometimes power shifts so completely that a once dominant civilization becomes a memory. The story of Chan Chan illustrates another important lesson. Not every disappearance occurs through sudden catastrophe. A civilization may lose independence. Its traditions may evolve. Its identity may transform. Generations later, historians describe a collapse, even though life continued throughout the transition. Yet the broader pattern remains familiar. A society that once appeared secure encountered forces it could not fully control. Environmental pressures, political competition, external expansion. Together, they reshaped the future. As centuries passed, many sections of Chan Chan gradually fell into decline. Adobe structures weathered beneath the elements. Wind eroded walls. Flooding caused damage. The city that once housed tens of thousands became quieter. its former grandeur faded. Visitors today encounter extensive ruins stretching across the desert landscape. The scale remains impressive. The silence remains striking. Walking through such places invites reflection. What conversations once filled these spaces? What hopes occupied the minds of those who lived here? Did they recognize the changes occurring around them? Did they believe recovery remained possible? Or did they slowly realize that their civilization was entering a new chapter from which there would be no return? These questions rarely have simple answers. Ancient people did not leave behind detailed explanations for every decision, most focused on daily life rather than recording history for future archaeologists. As a result, researchers piece together evidence from architecture, artifacts, environmental records, and surviving accounts. The picture becomes clearer over time, but uncertainty always remains. And perhaps that uncertainty reflects something fundamental about history itself. Human societies are extraordinarily complex. Millions of decisions shape their trajectories. No single factor determines outcomes. The disappearance of civilizations emerges from countless interactions, unfolding across years, decades, and centuries. The ruins merely preserve the final result. The lived experience remains largely invisible, as evening shadows stretched across the remains of ancient Andean cities. Another civilization elsewhere in the world faced challenges of its own. This one occupied a region famous for trade. Its merchants connected distant cultures. Its ships crossed dangerous waters. Its wealth flowed through busy ports. For generations, prosperity depended upon networks extending across thousands of miles. Then those networks began breaking apart. Economic relationships weakened. Trade routes shifted. Political authority fragmented. The transformation unfolded with surprising speed. Future generations would look back upon the abandoned cities and wonder how a civilization so connected to the wider world could become isolated and silent. The answer, as always, would prove more complicated than anyone expected. For now, however, the ocean winds continued blowing across the coast of South America, carrying grains of sand through empty corridors and abandoned plazas. While far across the globe, another great civilization moved steadily toward the moment when its own foundations would begin to crumble. For now, however, the ocean winds continued blowing across the coast of South America, carrying grains of sand through empty corridors and abandoned plazas. While far across the globe, another great civilization moved steadily toward the moment when its own foundations would begin to crumble. The ancient world depended upon connections. Long before modern highways, railroads, or airplanes existed, merchants carried goods across deserts, sailed through dangerous seas, and guided caravans over mountain passes. Trade linked distant societies together. Ideas traveled alongside commodities. Religions spread, Technologies moved between cultures. Wealth accumulated in cities, positioned along important routes. Few places demonstrated this reality more clearly than the great trading centers that flourished along the Silk Roads. Contrary to what the name suggests, the Silk Road was not a single road. It was a vast network. Countless routes stretched across Asia, the Middle East, and parts of Europe. Merchants transported silk, spices, precious metals, textiles, glassware, and countless other goods. Entire cities prospered because travelers needed places to rest, exchange merchandise, and gather information. Among these urban centers stood magnificent communities that appeared almost invincible. Their prosperity depended upon geography. Their fortunes relied upon movement. As long as trade continued, wealth flowed steadily. Markets remained active. Buildings expanded. Population increased. Life seemed secure. Imagine arriving at one of these cities after weeks of travel. The gates stand open. Languages from distant lands fill the air. Merchants negotiate prices. Animals crowd the streets. Food vendors serve travelers. Religious traditions from multiple cultures coexist side by side. The city feels alive. Its energy comes from constant motion. Every arriving caravan brings opportunity. Every departing caravan carries news. The future appears bright, yet there exists a hidden vulnerability within all trade-based civilizations. Their success depends upon systems extending far beyond local control. A farmer can often adapt to local conditions. A merchant city depends upon distant events. War hundreds of miles away can interrupt commerce. Political instability can alter routes. Environmental changes can affect transportation. New competitors can emerge unexpectedly. The factors supporting prosperity may disappear surprisingly quickly. One striking example comes from Central Asia. For centuries, oasis cities flourished in regions where water sources allowed settlement amid otherwise harsh landscapes. These communities became essential stops for traders crossing enormous distances. Without them, many journeys would have been impossible. Travelers depended upon their markets, supplies, and hospitality. As a result, wealth accumulated. Architecture reflected prosperity. Culture flourished. Generations assumed these cities would remain important forever. Then history shifted. Empires rose and fell. Trade routes changed direction. Political priorities evolved. New maritime technologies gradually altered global commerce. Sea travel became increasingly attractive for long-distance trade. Ships could transport larger quantities of goods. Certain overland routes lost importance. The change did not happen overnight. Yet, from a historical perspective, the transformation occurred surprisingly fast. A city thriving during one century might struggle during the next. Merchants began choosing alternative paths. Traffic declined. Economic opportunities diminished. The same streets that once overflowed with activity became quieter. Consider how dependent such communities were upon constant movement. If caravans stopped arriving, local businesses suffered. If merchants selected different routes, tax revenues declined. If political unrest discouraged travel, entire sectors of the economy weakened. Prosperity depended upon forces extending across continents. That dependence created both opportunity and risk. One famous example involved several ancient cities scattered across the deserts of Central Asia. Today, many survive only as ruins. Wind moves through abandoned walls. Sand covers former streets. Travelers encounter remnants of settlements that once connected civilizations separated by thousands of miles. The contrast is striking. Places that once stood at the center of global trade now occupy remote and isolated landscapes. How does such a transformation occur? The answer rarely involves a single disaster. More often, importance gradually shifts elsewhere. Economic gravity moves. People follow opportunities. Communities adapt. Eventually, the old centers no longer perform the functions that once sustained them. Their populations shrink. Maintenance declines. Buildings deteriorate. Silence slowly replaces activity. For those living through these changes, the process likely felt confusing. A merchant notices fewer customers. An innkeeper receives fewer travelers. Market stalls remain empty longer. Each year seems slightly different from the last. No dramatic announcement declares the end of prosperity. Instead, the city gradually loses the momentum that once defined it. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout history. Civilizations often depend upon conditions that seem permanent. Trade routes, climate patterns, political arrangements, technological advantages. When those conditions change, societies must adapt. Some succeed, others struggle. The difference often determines whether communities survive or fade into memory. The decline of many Silk Road cities highlights another fascinating reality. Success can become a trap. A city designed around one economic system may find adaptation difficult when that system changes. Infrastructure reflects past needs. Institutions develop around established patterns. People build expectations based upon familiar circumstances. When the world evolves, those advantages can become limitations. Imagine a city whose entire economy revolves around passing caravans. What happens when ships begin carrying most valuable goods? What happens when political borders shift? What happens when safer or faster routes emerge elsewhere? The city remains physically present. Its walls still stand. Its wells still provide water. Yet the reason for its existence begins disappearing. History contains countless examples of such transformations. Ports decline when shipping patterns change. Mining towns fade after resources become exhausted. Trade centers lose importance when transportation technologies evolve. Ancient civilizations experienced the same challenges. The scale differed. The underlying principles remained remarkably similar. As centuries passed, many once famous Silk Road settlements entered long periods of decline. Some survived as smaller communities. Others disappeared almost entirely. The desert preserved fragments of their existence. Pottery remained buried beneath the sand. Foundations marked former buildings. Artifacts hinted at lives once lived there. Archaeologists later uncovered these traces and attempted to reconstruct forgotten stories. The evidence revealed societies that had once stood at the crossroads of the world. Their disappearance reminds us that connectivity itself can become a source of vulnerability. The more dependent a civilization becomes upon external systems, the more exposed it may be when those systems change. Trade brings prosperity. It also creates reliance. When networks collapse, consequences spread rapidly. Ancient merchants, likely never imagined future historians, would study the ruins of their cities. They focused upon immediate concerns: profits, supplies, travel conditions, family responsibilities. Like people in every era, they lived within the present. The larger historical transformation remained invisible until it had already occurred. And while desert winds slowly buried portions of these former trade centers, another civilization was approaching an even more dramatic reckoning. This one occupied an island. Its fleets once dominated surrounding waters. Its palaces displayed extraordinary wealth. Its artists created stunning works. Its influence extended across neighboring regions. Then, within a relatively brief period, disaster struck. Nature unleashed a force so immense that its consequences echoed across centuries. Entire communities faced upheaval. Political systems weakened. The future became uncertain. Far out in the waters of the ancient Mediterranean, beneath a sky glowing with distant stars, the next chapter in the story of disappearing civilizations was preparing to begin. Far out in the waters of the ancient Mediterranean, beneath a sky glowing with distant stars, the next chapter in the story of disappearing civilizations was preparing to begin. Thousands of years ago, long before the rise of classical Greece, a powerful civilization flourished on the island of Crete. Its people built impressive palaces. Its merchants traded across the Mediterranean. Its artists decorated walls with vibrant scenes of daily life. Its ships connected distant shores. Today, historians call this society the Minoan Civilization. For generations, the Minoans enjoyed advantages that many neighboring cultures envied. The sea served as both highway and protective barrier. Trade brought wealth. Agriculture supported communities. Craftsmanship flourished. The great palaces of places like Knossos stood as symbols of prosperity and organization. to visitors arriving by ship, the island must have seemed remarkably successful. Imagine approaching Crete on a calm morning. Sunlight reflects across the water. Harbors bustle with activity. Sailors unload cargo. Merchants discuss business. Officials oversee transactions. Beyond the shoreline rise impressive structures. Unlike anything many travelers had previously encountered, the atmosphere conveys confidence. This is a civilization that expects its future to continue. Such confidence rarely appears unreasonable during periods of prosperity. People naturally assume successful systems will endure. When trade flourishes for generations, stability feels normal. When institutions function effectively, they seem permanent. Yet beneath the surface of everyday life, forces beyond human control sometimes gather strength. Far north of Crete lay the island of Thera, known today as Santorini. For centuries, its volcanic nature remained part of the landscape. The mountain existed. People lived nearby. Life continued. Few could imagine the scale of the event that was slowly approaching. Volcanoes possess a peculiar relationship with human history. Most of the time, they remain quiet. Generations may pass without major activity. Communities adapt to their presence. The danger feels distant. Then suddenly, the earth reminds everyone that the apparent stability was temporary. At some point during the second millennium BCE, Thera experienced one of the largest volcanic eruptions in recorded human history. The explosion transformed the island. Massive quantities of ash entered the atmosphere. Shockwaves spread across the region. Tsunamis likely struck surrounding coastlines. The event would have been terrifying beyond description. Imagine standing near the shore as the sea behaves strangely. Perhaps the water begins retreating. Perhaps unusual sounds echo across the horizon. Then enormous waves appear. People run. Boats are thrown inland. Buildings collapse. Confusion spreads rapidly. No one understands the full scale of what is happening. Only later does the devastation become clear. The eruption of Thera has fascinated historians for generations. Exactly how it affected the Minoan civilization remains debated. Some scholars believe the consequences were immediate and severe. Others argue the civilization survived the eruption and declined later due to additional factors. The evidence suggests a complex story rather than a simple one. As with many civilizations in our journey, multiple forces likely interacted. Natural disasters rarely operate in isolation. They create opportunities for other problems to emerge. Economic disruption follows physical destruction. Political instability follows economic disruption. External rivals exploit weakened conditions. Recovery becomes increasingly difficult. For a maritime civilization such as the Minoans, tsunamis and disruptions to trade could prove especially damaging. Ships represented lifelines. Harbors connected communities. Commerce supported prosperity. If these systems suffered major interruptions, the effects would spread quickly. Yet perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this story is that the eruption alone may not have destroyed the civilization. The Minoans demonstrated resilience. Communities rebuilt. Life continued. Palaces remained active for some time afterward. That reality reveals an important truth about human societies. People often survive disasters. The challenge comes afterward. Recovery requires resources, coordination, leadership, patience. A society weakened by catastrophe may become vulnerable to threats that previously posed little danger. As years passed, new pressures emerged. The Mycenaeans from mainland Greece expanded their influence. Political dynamics shifted. Power balances changed. Eventually, many Minoan centers lost their previous independence. The civilization transformed. Its distinct identity gradually faded into the broader currents of Mediterranean history. For future generations, the result appeared dramatic. A civilization that once dominated regional trade no longer occupied the same position. Its palaces became ruins. Its political systems disappeared. Its influence declined. Visitors centuries later encountered remnants of a world that had once seemed secure. Walking through the reconstructed corridors of Knossos today offers a strange sensation. The architecture suggests activity. The rooms imply purpose. The murals hint at vibrant lives. Yet the people themselves are gone. Only traces remain. That contrast lies at the heart of nearly every story in this series. Civilizations leave evidence of their achievements. They rarely leave complete explanations for their disappearance. Historians reconstruct possibilities. Archaeologists analyze clues. Researchers debate interpretations. The mystery never fully disappears. Perhaps that uncertainty explains why vanished civilizations continue capturing human imagination. They force us to confront uncomfortable questions. How stable are successful societies? How much control do people truly possess over their futures? Can any civilization guarantee its survival indefinitely? The Minoans remind us that prosperity and vulnerability often coexist. A society may appear powerful while hidden risks accumulate. Those risks remain invisible until circumstances reveal them. By then, responses become more difficult. Across history, countless communities have learned this lesson. Environmental changes, natural disasters, economic disruptions, political conflicts, external pressures. Rarely does a single factor determine outcomes. More often, several challenges arrive together. Their combined effects prove overwhelming. As twilight settled across ancient Crete, fishermen pulled boats onto shore. Families gathered for meals. Children listened to stories. Merchants calculated profits. Priests conducted ceremonies. most people remained focused on ordinary concerns. The volcanic mountain far away was not part of their daily thoughts. Life felt familiar, predictable, manageable. Then history changed. Not instantly, not in a single moment, but enough that future generations would speak of a lost civilization whose greatness survived only through ruins and fragments. The sea that once carried wealth now carried memories. The palaces that once displayed power now displayed absence. And while the Mediterranean slowly absorbed the echoes of the Minoan world, another civilization was approaching a challenge even more devastating. This society occupied fertile lands between rivers. Its cities had survived for centuries. Its people developed writing, laws, and administration. Some of humanity's earliest urban centers emerged there. For thousands of years, the region shaped the course of civilization itself. Yet even this cradle of urban life would experience periods when entire cities emptied, trade collapsed, and once crowded streets fell silent as moonlight reflected across the waters surrounding Crete. The story continued eastward toward the ancient lands of Mesopotamia, where some of the earliest civilizations on Earth would discover that being first offered no protection from decline. As moonlight reflected across the waters surrounding Crete, the story continued eastward toward the ancient lands of Mesopotamia, where some of the earliest civilizations on Earth would discover that being first offered no protection from decline. Between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers lay a region often called the cradle of civilization. Here, some of humanity's earliest cities emerged. Here, writing developed. Here, administrators recorded taxes, merchants tracked transactions, and rulers governed increasingly complex societies. For thousands of years, Mesopotamia stood at the forefront of urban civilization. Its cities influenced neighboring regions. Its innovations shaped human history. Its people helped create many of the foundations upon which later civilizations would build. To modern observers, places such as Uruk, Akkad, and Babylon possess an almost legendary status. Yet the people who lived there did not see themselves as legends. They worried about harvests. They raised children. They paid taxes. They argued with neighbors. They pursued ordinary lives beneath extraordinary circumstances. At sunrise, farmers guided animals through fields nourished by irrigation canals. Merchants prepared goods for market. Scribes sharpened reed styluses. Builders repaired walls. The city awakened. Life followed patterns repeated across generations. The existence of cities seemed natural, permanent, expected, and perhaps that is one of history's most fascinating themes. People living within successful civilizations rarely imagine that future centuries might view their world as a vanished age. To them, civilization feels normal. Its continuation feels inevitable. Mesopotamia enjoyed advantages that encouraged such confidence. The rivers provided water. Agriculture produced surpluses. Trade connected distant regions. Population growth supported urban expansion. For long periods, prosperity appeared secure. Yet these same advantages created vulnerabilities. The irrigation systems that made large-scale agriculture possible required careful management. Canals demanded maintenance. Water distribution required coordination. Fields depended upon environmental balance. When that balance shifted, consequences followed. One challenge emerged slowly over time. As irrigation continued century after century, salts naturally accumulated in portions of the soil. At first, the effects remained limited. Harvests continued. Communities adapted. But gradual environmental changes can become significant when measured across generations. Crop yields declined in certain areas. Agricultural productivity faced increasing pressure. No single season revealed the full problem. Instead, the challenge unfolded so slowly that many people likely failed to notice its long-term significance. History often works this way. The most important transformations are not always dramatic. Sometimes they occur quietly. A little less productivity each year, a little more strain upon resources, a little greater difficulty maintaining existing systems. Eventually, those small changes accumulate. Meanwhile, political competition added further complexity. Mesopotamia rarely existed as a single unified civilization for long periods. Different city-states competed for influence. Empires rose and fell. Conquests altered political boundaries. Victorious rulers expanded territories. Defeated rulers disappeared from power. The landscape remained dynamic. Such competition sometimes stimulated innovation and growth. At other times, it created instability. Imagine living in a city whose leadership changes repeatedly. New rulers introduce new policies. Military campaigns disrupt trade. Taxes fluctuate. Resources shift toward defense. The uncertainty affects ordinary people even when battles occur far away. Economic life becomes less predictable. Confidence weakens. The future appears less secure. One particularly striking example involved the Akkadian Empire, founded by Sargon of Akkad. It became one of the first great empires in history. Its influence extended across large regions. Its rulers controlled impressive resources. Its achievements appeared extraordinary. For a time, the empire seemed unstoppable. Then conditions changed. Researchers studying the period have identified evidence suggesting severe drought affected parts of the region. Environmental stress placed pressure upon agriculture. Population movements increased. Political challenges intensified. The empire weakened. Eventually, it fragmented. To later generations, the collapse appeared dramatic. A powerful state that once dominated vast territories lost control. Cities struggled, authority dissolved. The transformation left a lasting impression upon historical memory. Ancient texts themselves sometimes reflected awareness of environmental difficulties. People recognized that changing conditions affected society. They may not have understood every cause, but they certainly experienced the consequences. Food shortages, economic hardship, migration, conflict. These realities shaped daily life far more directly than abstract political theories. The story repeated itself in various forms throughout Mesopotamian history. Cities prospered, cities declined, empires expanded, empires fractured. New powers emerged from the remnants of older ones. Civilization persisted even when specific states disappeared. That distinction is important. The decline of a particular city does not necessarily mean the end of human activity. People relocate, trade routes adjust, institutions evolve, history continues. Yet for those living through transitions, the experience often feels profound. Imagine watching a once busy district grow quieter each year. Market stalls remain empty. Buildings fall into disrepair. Neighbors move elsewhere. The city remains recognizable, but its energy diminishes. Memories begin outnumbering opportunities. Eventually, entire sections stand abandoned. Such scenes occurred repeatedly across ancient Mesopotamia. Some cities recovered, others did not. The reasons varied. Environmental pressures played a role. Political instability mattered. Economic changes influenced outcomes. External invasions added further complications. No single explanation captures every case. The complexity itself reveals something important. Civilizations are not machines with simple causes and effects. They are living systems composed of millions of interactions. Their successes depend upon cooperation across enormous scales. Their failures emerge when too many supporting structures weaken simultaneously. Perhaps nowhere is this more visible than in the ruins scattered throughout Mesopotamia today. Ancient mounds rise above otherwise flat landscapes. Beneath them lie layers of forgotten generations. One city built upon another, one civilization followed by the next. Each believed it occupied a lasting place in history. Each eventually confronted change. Archaeologists excavating these sites uncover evidence of both continuity and disruption. A destroyed building, a rebuilt neighborhood, a change in pottery styles, a shift in population. Together, these details reveal civilizations constantly adapting to new circumstances. Yet adaptation has limits. When challenges multiply beyond a society's capacity to respond, decline becomes increasingly likely. As evening descended over the fertile plains between the rivers, shepherds guided animals toward shelter. Families gathered behind mud brick walls. Oil lamps illuminated homes. Conversations drifted through narrow streets, most people focused upon immediate concerns: tomorrow's harvest, next month's taxes, the health of relatives, the possibility of rain. Like people everywhere, they lived within the present. The larger forces reshaping their world remained difficult to see. Only centuries later would historians connect environmental records, archaeological discoveries, and ancient texts into broader narratives. At the time, life simply continued, until it did not, until familiar systems weakened, until confidence eroded, until cities that once symbolized human achievement became ruins studied by future generations. And while Mesopotamia experienced its recurring cycles of growth and decline, another civilization far away was building immense monuments that would one day stand alone amid abandoned landscapes. Its rulers commanded extraordinary labor forces. Its cities reflected sophisticated planning. Its culture inspired neighboring societies. For centuries, it appeared stable. Then a combination of environmental stress, warfare, and political upheaval transformed its future. Deep within the jungles and highlands of ancient Mesoamerica, another chapter in the long history of disappearing civilizations was quietly waiting to unfold. Deep within the jungles and highlands of ancient Mesoamerica, another chapter in the long history of disappearing civilizations was quietly waiting to unfold. Long before the arrival of Europeans in the Americas, a remarkable city rose in the highlands of central Mexico. Its avenues stretched across the landscape with impressive precision. Its pyramids dominated the horizon. Its neighborhoods housed people from diverse backgrounds. Its markets connected distant regions. At its height, it became one of the largest cities in the world. Today, historians know it as Teotihuacan. Even its original name has been lost to time. That fact alone reveals something fascinating about vanished civilizations. A city can influence millions of lives. It can shape trade, culture, religion, and politics across entire regions. Then centuries later, even its true name may disappear. Only stone remains. Yet during its golden age, Teotihuacan appeared anything but fragile. Imagine standing upon the broad avenue of the dead during the city's height. Crowds move through public spaces. Merchants offer goods brought from distant territories. Religious ceremonies attract large gatherings. Artisans produce pottery, jewelry, and tools. The enormous pyramid of the sun rises above everything else. The city radiates confidence, order, purpose. Visitors arriving from smaller settlements must have been astonished. Urban centers possess a unique ability to create impressions of permanence. Massive buildings suggest stability. Wide roads imply planning. Large populations indicate success. To residents, such places often feel indestructible. Yet history repeatedly teaches a different lesson. The larger and more complex a civilization becomes, the more systems must continue functioning for stability to survive. Water supplies must remain reliable. Food must reach urban populations. Political authority must maintain legitimacy. Economic networks must remain active. Social tensions must stay manageable. If enough of these factors weaken simultaneously, even the greatest cities can encounter serious difficulties. For centuries, Teotihuacan flourished. Its influence extended across much of Mesoamerica. Evidence of its cultural reach appears hundreds of miles away. Its merchants traveled extensively. Its religious symbols spread widely. Its leaders oversaw a society capable of organizing enormous construction projects. Yet sometime during the middle of the first millennium CE, the city entered a period of crisis. Archaeologists studying the evidence have uncovered intriguing clues. Certain elite structures appear to have been deliberately burned. Important districts suffered destruction. Political authority may have weakened. Social unrest may have increased. The exact causes remain debated. As always, the reality was likely complex. Environmental challenges may have contributed. Economic pressures may have played a role. Internal conflicts may have intensified. Multiple factors probably interacted. Imagine living in a neighborhood where rumors begin spreading. Perhaps food prices are rising. Perhaps political disagreements are becoming more visible. Perhaps trust in leadership is fading. No single event appears catastrophic, yet the atmosphere changes. People become uncertain. Confidence erodes. History often unfolds through such subtle shifts before dramatic outcomes emerge. One of the most intriguing possibilities involves growing inequality within the city. Large civilizations frequently generate wealth. Unfortunately, wealth is not always distributed evenly. Some groups prosper greatly. Others struggle. When disparities become severe, tensions increase. Communities may begin questioning existing institutions. Social stability becomes harder to maintain. Researchers continue exploring whether such dynamics contributed to Teotihuacan's decline. The archaeological evidence cannot answer every question. Human motivations rarely leave clear traces after centuries have passed. Nevertheless, patterns suggest a society experiencing significant internal strain. Eventually, major sections of the city suffered destruction. Population levels declined. Political structures transformed. The urban center that once dominated the region lost much of its influence. The process did not necessarily occur in a single dramatic year. Yet, from a historical perspective, the decline was remarkably swift. One generation inherited a thriving metropolis. Later generations encountered a very different reality. Perhaps the most striking aspect of Teotihuacan's story is what happened afterward. The city remained impressive, even in ruin. Centuries later, other civilizations encountered its abandoned monuments and felt awe. The Aztecs, arriving long after the city's decline, regarded the site as sacred. They believed it possessed profound historical significance. The enormous pyramids inspired wonder. The abandoned avenues suggested forgotten greatness. The ruins themselves became part of later mythology. Imagine exploring such a place centuries after its abandonment. The buildings remain, the streets remain, the monuments remain, yet no one remembers exactly who built them. The city feels both familiar and mysterious. Its silence invites speculation. Its scale demands explanation. This phenomenon appears repeatedly throughout history. Abandoned cities often become objects of legend. Future generations attempt to understand what happened. Stories emerge. Myths develop. Reality becomes intertwined with imagination. Teotihuacan demonstrates how quickly certainty can disappear. At its peak, residents likely assumed their city would endure indefinitely. The institutions appeared strong. The population remained large. The monuments projected permanence. Yet within a relatively short period, the foundations of that confidence weakened. The city survived physically. Its social and political systems did not. Walking among the ruins today encourages reflection upon time itself. The pyramids still cast shadows. The avenues still stretch toward the horizon. Visitors still experience wonder. Yet the civilization that created them exists only through fragments. Pottery, murals, foundations, artifacts. Researchers reconstruct stories from these pieces, but complete certainty remains impossible. Perhaps that uncertainty mirrors the experiences of the people who lived through the decline. They likely lacked complete understanding as well. A merchant noticed fewer customers. A laborer observed reduced construction. A family considered relocating. Each person experienced only part of the larger transformation. No one possessed the full picture. History rarely announces its turning points in advance. They become obvious only later. As years passed, vegetation slowly advanced into neglected spaces. Buildings weathered beneath sun and rain. Birds nested where crowds once gathered. Silence settled over plazas designed for thousands. The city that once stood among the greatest urban centers on Earth became a landscape of memory. Yet the broader story of disappearing civilizations continued. Far across the oceans, another society was approaching a challenge unlike any encountered so far. Its wealth depended upon a vast network of settlements spread across a remote island environment. Its people accomplished extraordinary feats of engineering and navigation. For centuries, they adapted successfully to isolation. Then resources grew scarce. Choices became more difficult. Competition increased. The consequences would eventually transform one of the most famous islands in the world into a symbol of collapse, resilience, and historical debate. As twilight deepened across the abandoned avenues of Teotihuacan, waves rolled endlessly across distant oceans toward an island where giant stone statues watched the horizon, and a civilization prepared to confront its greatest test. As twilight deepened across the abandoned avenues of Teotihuacan, waves rolled endlessly across distant oceans toward an island where giant stone statues watched the horizon, and a civilization prepared to confront its greatest test. Far out in the southeastern Pacific Ocean lies one of the most isolated inhabited islands on Earth. Today it is known as Easter Island, or Rapa Nui. The nearest major landmass lies thousands of miles away. The surrounding ocean stretches endlessly in every direction. For modern visitors, the island feels remote. For the people who first arrived there centuries ago, it must have seemed like an entirely new world. At some point, skilled Polynesian navigators crossed enormous distances using knowledge of stars, winds, currents, and waves. Their achievements remain astonishing. Without modern instruments, they traveled across one of the largest oceans on Earth and successfully settled a tiny island far from any continent. The settlers brought plants, animals, traditions, and hopes for the future. They established communities. They cultivated crops. They adapted to local conditions. Over generations, a distinctive society emerged. Today, Easter Island is famous for its massive stone statues known as moai. These monuments stand among the most recognizable archaeological wonders in the world. Some gaze inland, others overlook different parts of the landscape. Their enormous size continues to fascinate researchers and visitors alike. Creating them required organization, labor, and resources. Transporting them demanded ingenuity. The statues testify to the capabilities of the society that built them. Imagine the island during its period of prosperity. Families cultivate fields. Children play near villages. Craftsmen shape stone. Religious ceremonies bring communities together. Groups of workers cooperate on monument projects. The future appears promising. Like every civilization in our story, the people of Rapa Nui likely believed their society would continue. They could not know that centuries later, outsiders would debate the reasons for its transformation. For many years, a popular narrative dominated discussions about Easter Island. According to this interpretation, the islanders supposedly cut down all their trees, destroyed their environment, and caused the collapse of their own civilization. The story became famous because it seemed to offer a dramatic lesson about environmental mismanagement. Yet modern research paints a far more complicated picture. Reality appears richer and more nuanced than the simple collapse narrative often presented. Environmental changes certainly occurred. Forests declined dramatically over time. The island's landscape transformed. However, researchers now believe multiple factors contributed to these developments. Introduced rats may have affected tree regeneration by consuming seeds. Human activity played a role. Climate conditions mattered. External influences eventually became important as well. The story reflects complexity rather than simplicity. This complexity mirrors many examples throughout history. Civilizations rarely disappear because of a single mistake. Instead, multiple pressures interact. Environmental challenges overlap with social changes. External threats combine with internal difficulties. The resulting transformation can appear sudden from a distance, even when it develops gradually. For the people of Rapa Nui, shrinking forests created practical challenges. Trees provide building materials. They support transportation. They offer fuel. They influence local ecosystems. As forest cover declined, daily life became more difficult. Communities adapted where possible. Agricultural methods evolved. Resources were managed differently, yet adaptation required effort. Imagine living on an island where familiar resources become harder to obtain each generation. Your grandparents remember forests that no longer exist. Your parents travel farther to gather materials. You inherit a landscape already transformed. The changes occur slowly enough that each generation adjusts. Yet over centuries, the cumulative effects become profound. The story becomes even more complicated when European contact enters the picture. In the 18th century, outsiders arrived. With them came diseases, disruptions, and new pressures. Later events proved devastating. Slave raids removed large portions of the population. Introduced illnesses caused tremendous suffering. Traditional systems faced enormous challenges. By the 19th century, the society that had created the Moai experienced severe hardship. When visitors encountered the island during these periods, they often assumed they were witnessing the aftermath of an ancient collapse. In reality, many of the most damaging events had occurred relatively recently. This misunderstanding reminds us how easily historical narratives can become distorted. Observers see ruins and assume they understand the cause. The truth is often more complicated. Easter Island teaches another important lesson. Civilizations are not static. They evolve continuously. The islanders adapted repeatedly to changing conditions. They modified agricultural practices. They reorganized communities. They demonstrated resilience. The fact that descendants still live on the island today is evidence of that adaptability. The civilization changed. The people endured. Still, the image of the Moai, standing against the sky, remains deeply powerful. These statues symbolize both achievement and mystery. They remind us of the ambitions that drive human societies. Communities invest enormous effort in projects they believe will matter for future generations. Monuments express identity. They communicate values. They reflect confidence in continuity. Yet time eventually alters every landscape. Even the most impressive achievements become fragments of larger stories. Imagine standing beside a moe at sunset. The ocean stretches endlessly before you. Wind moves across the grass. The statue remains silent. Centuries have passed since the people who carved it first saw it completed. Empires elsewhere rose and fell. Technologies transformed the world. The statue remained. Its creators became history. Such moments encourage reflection upon the relationship between permanence and change. Human societies constantly seek stability, yet change remains inevitable. The challenge lies not in preventing change, but in adapting to it. Some civilizations adapt successfully. Others struggle. Most experience both outcomes at different times. As darkness settled across Rapa Nui, waves crashed against volcanic cliffs. The stars emerged overhead. The same stars that guided the first navigators centuries earlier continued shining across the ocean. Generations had come and gone beneath them. The island had changed. Its people had changed. Yet life continued. And while the moe watched silently across the landscape, another civilization on the opposite side of the world faced a very different crisis. This society occupied one of the most fertile regions in Europe. Its roads connected distant provinces. Its armies defended vast frontiers. Its cities housed millions. Its influence stretched across continents. For centuries, many believed it represented the pinnacle of civilization itself. Then political instability, economic pressures, migration, disease, and military challenges began interacting in ways few fully understood. The consequences would transform the ancient world. Future generations would debate whether it truly collapsed or simply evolved into something new. Either way, the disappearance of its familiar institutions would mark one of history's most significant turning points. As moonlight illuminated the giant statues of Easter Island, the story continued toward a civilization so vast that its decline would reshape the destiny of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East for centuries to come. As moonlight illuminated the giant statues of Easter Island, the story continued toward a civilization so vast that its decline would reshape the destiny of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East for centuries to come. Few civilizations have captured the imagination of later generations as completely as ancient Rome. Its roads crossed continents. Its armies conquered enormous territories. Its laws influenced future societies. Its architecture inspired builders for centuries. At its height, the Roman world stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the deserts of the Middle East. Millions of people lived under its authority. Merchants traveled safely across vast distances. Cities flourished. Trade prospered. To many inhabitants, Rome appeared unstoppable. Imagine standing in the heart of the city during its golden age. Crowds fill the streets. Vendors call out to customers. Officials move between government buildings. Soldiers patrol public spaces. Ships unload cargo at nearby ports. The empire feels alive, powerful, permanent. For generations, Romans cultivated the belief that their civilization possessed a special destiny. Their achievements seemed to confirm it. Each new victory reinforced confidence. Each successful generation assumed the future would resemble the past. Yet history has a habit of surprising even the most powerful societies. The story of Rome's decline remains one of the most debated subjects in historical scholarship. Part of the reason is simple. There was no single moment when the Roman world suddenly disappeared. Instead, a long series of challenges gradually transformed it. From a distance, the process appears clear. For those living through it, the experience must have felt confusing and uncertain. One problem involved the sheer size of the empire. Expansion brought wealth. Expansion also created complexity. Defending distant frontiers required enormous resources. Maintaining infrastructure demanded constant investment. Administering diverse populations presented endless challenges. Success generated responsibilities. The larger the empire became, the more difficult it grew to manage. Political instability added further complications. Emperors rose to power. Some governed effectively, others did not. Succession crises became increasingly common. Competing factions struggled for control. Civil wars erupted. Resources that might have strengthened the empire instead funded internal conflicts. Imagine being an ordinary citizen during such times. One ruler issues policies. A few years later, another ruler reverses them. Taxes change. Military priorities shift. Rumors spread. Confidence weakens. Most people care less about political theory than stability. When stability disappears, anxiety follows. Economic pressures also accumulated. Inflation affected markets. Trade networks experienced disruptions. Government expenses increased. Maintaining the empire's enormous military required vast expenditures. Officials searched for ways to raise revenue. Tax burdens grew heavier in some regions. Economic difficulties rarely remain isolated. They affect daily life. Farmers struggle. Merchants face uncertainty. Communities experience strain. Meanwhile, external pressures intensified. Groups beyond Rome's borders migrated, traded, negotiated, and occasionally fought with imperial authorities. For centuries, Rome had managed these relationships successfully. Over time, however, circumstances changed. Population movements increased. New political realities emerged. Frontier regions became more difficult to control. The empire remained powerful, yet maintaining that power required growing effort. Disease, may have contributed as well. Several epidemics affected the Roman world. Large populations living in interconnected cities create opportunities for illnesses to spread rapidly. The consequences can be severe. Labor shortages develop. Economic activity declines. Military recruitment suffers. Recovery becomes more difficult when other problems already exist. Notice a familiar pattern emerging. Rarely does a civilization disappear because of a single cause. Instead, multiple challenges arrive together. Political instability, economic difficulties, environmental pressures, disease, external threats. Each problem weakens society. Together, they become much harder to manage. By the 4th and 5th centuries, significant transformations were underway. The empire increasingly divided administrative responsibilities between eastern and western regions. This arrangement offered certain advantages. It also reflected growing complexity. The eastern portions generally remained wealthier and more stable. The western regions faced mounting difficulties. Then came a series of events that later generations would remember vividly. In 410 CE, the city of Rome itself was sacked by the Visigoths. For centuries, Romans had viewed their capital as nearly untouchable. The shock was enormous. Although the city recovered, the psychological impact proved profound. People began questioning assumptions that once seemed unquestionable. If Rome could be attacked, what else might change? Several decades later, additional invasions occurred. Political authority weakened further. Regional leaders gained influence. Imperial institutions struggled to maintain control. Finally, in 476 CE, a traditional date often associated with the fall of the Western Roman Empire arrived. A Germanic leader named Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor. History textbooks frequently present this moment as the end of Rome. Reality was more complicated. Life did not suddenly stop. Cities continued existing. People continued farming. Trade continued, though often at reduced levels. Many Roman traditions survived. The Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, endured for nearly another 1,000 years. Yet something important had changed. The familiar political structures of the Western Empire disappeared. The world people knew transformed. Perhaps that is why Rome remains such a fascinating example. Its decline was neither completely sudden nor entirely gradual. Different regions experienced change at different speeds. Some areas adapted successfully. Others suffered severe disruptions. For ordinary people, the experience varied enormously. A farmer in one province might notice little difference initially. A merchant in another region might see opportunities vanish rapidly. History often appears simpler from a distance than it felt in reality. Imagine living during the final centuries of the Western Empire. You hear reports of distant conflicts. Taxes increase. Travel becomes less predictable. Officials change frequently. Economic conditions fluctuate. The old certainty fades. No one can clearly explain what the future holds. Then, over time, familiar institutions disappear. A new world emerges. The transition feels confusing rather than dramatic. Generations later, historians assign labels and dates. Those who lived through it simply adapted as best they could. The story of Rome offers another important reminder. Civilizations do not always vanish completely. They often transform. Roman laws influenced successor kingdoms. Roman roads remained in use. Roman cities continued serving as population centers. Roman cultural traditions survived in new forms. The empire ended. Its legacy endured. Across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, traces of Rome persisted long after imperial authority faded. Ruins stood as reminders of earlier centuries. Aqueducts crossed landscapes. Amphitheaters overlooked towns. Monuments testified to former greatness. Travelers encountering them often felt awe. How could a civilization capable of such achievements lose its dominance? The answer, once again, involved complexity. No single disaster destroyed Rome. Rather, a web of interconnected challenges gradually reshaped the ancient world. As evenings settled over crumbling forums and weathered temples, people continued living among the remnants of empire. Children played near monuments built centuries earlier. Farmers cultivated fields once taxed by Roman officials. Communities adapted to new realities. Life moved forward. Yet elsewhere, another civilization was approaching an even more sudden and mysterious disappearance. Its cities occupied dense tropical forests. Its monuments rose above jungle canopies. Its rulers recorded history in carved stone inscriptions. Then, within a surprisingly short historical period, many of its greatest urban centers emptied. The forest advanced. The monuments remained. The people moved on, and future generations would spend centuries trying to understand why. As the last light faded over the former Roman world, the story turned once more toward the jungles of Mesoamerica, where one of history's most enduring mysteries awaited beneath the trees. As the last light faded over the former Roman world, the story turned once more toward the jungles of Mesoamerica, where one of history's most enduring mysteries awaited beneath the trees. For centuries, travelers moving through the forests of Central America occasionally encountered something extraordinary. Towering stone structures emerged from dense vegetation. Ancient stairways climbed toward the sky. Carved monuments stood among tangled roots. Entire cities appeared hidden beneath the jungle. To outsiders, the sight felt almost impossible. How could places so large have been forgotten? Who built them? Why had they been abandoned? These questions fascinated explorers, archaeologists, historians, and dreamers alike. Yet the answers, as with so many stories in this journey, proved more complicated than the legends. The civilization responsible for many of these remarkable cities was the Maya. Earlier in our story, we briefly visited their world. Now, near the end of our long exploration, we return once more because their experience captures nearly every lesson hidden within the history of disappearing civilizations. At their height, Maya cities represented extraordinary achievements. Rulers commissioned vast building projects. Astronomers tracked celestial movements with impressive accuracy. Artists created intricate works. Scribes recorded historical events. Trade connected communities across great distances. Population centers flourished. From the perspective of those living there, civilization appeared strong. Yet strength and vulnerability often exist side by side. One of history's recurring patterns is that successful societies gradually become dependent upon systems that function only under specific conditions. As populations grow, demands increase. More food becomes necessary. More resources are required. More coordination becomes essential. As long as those systems operate smoothly, prosperity continues. When disruptions occur, the consequences spread quickly. Researchers studying the decline of many southern Maya cities have identified several contributing factors. Environmental pressures likely played an important role. Periods of drought affected regions already supporting large populations. Political rivalries intensified. Warfare became more frequent in certain areas. Economic systems faced strain. The exact balance between these factors remains debated, but one conclusion appears increasingly clear. No single event explains the transformation. Rather, multiple challenges arrive together. This pattern has appeared repeatedly throughout our journey. The Bronze Age kingdoms experienced overlapping crises. The Indus Valley Civilization faced environmental changes. The Minoans confronted natural disaster and political competition. Rome encountered economic, military, and administrative pressures. Again and again, civilizations proved most vulnerable when several problems reinforced one another. The Maya were no exception. Imagine living during those years. The rains become less reliable. Food production grows more difficult. Political conflicts increase. Trade becomes less predictable. Communities that once cooperated begin competing. Families hear troubling reports from neighboring regions. No single challenge seems insurmountable, yet together they create an atmosphere of uncertainty. Slowly, confidence begins to fade. People adapt where possible. Some relocate, others remain. Leaders attempt solutions. Not all succeed. Years pass, then decades. Gradually, some cities lose population. Construction projects slow. Monuments become less frequent. Political authority weakens. What once seemed permanent begins changing. The transformation did not occur overnight, yet to later generations, the result appeared astonishing. Great urban centers stood largely empty. Forests advanced into plazas. Trees grew among temples. Birds nested atop monuments, once surrounded by crowds. Nature reclaimed spaces shaped by centuries of human effort. And perhaps that image has become one of history's most powerful symbols. The jungle swallowing cities, the silence replacing ceremony, the monuments remaining while the people move elsewhere. Yet even here, the reality remains more hopeful than the myths often suggest. The Maya did not disappear. Their descendants live today. Their languages survive. Their traditions continue. The cities declined. The civilization transformed. The people endured. This distinction may be the most important lesson of all. Throughout our exploration, we have spoken about civilizations disappearing. Yet in many cases, people continued living, adapting, and rebuilding. Empires ended. Communities survived. Capitals fell silent. Families carried traditions forward. History is not merely a story of collapse. It is also a story of resilience. The ruins attract attention because they are visible. The survival of ordinary people often receives less recognition. Yet without that survival, no civilization could leave descendants at all. As we approach the end of this long journey, a broader picture begins to emerge. The ancient world was not filled with civilizations that simply vanished without explanation. Instead, it was filled with societies confronting challenges. Some adapted successfully. Some struggled. Most experienced both outcomes at different moments. Environmental change influenced their futures. Political instability altered trajectories. Trade networks shifted. Diseases spread. Wars erupted. Resources became scarce. New competitors emerged. No civilization controlled every variable. No society remained immune forever. The monuments left behind often create the illusion that the past was stable. In reality, the people who built them lived in worlds as uncertain as our own. They worried about weather. They worried about food. They worried about politics, trade, security, and family. They made decisions without knowing how history would judge them. They adapted to changing circumstances as best they could, just like people today. Perhaps that is why the ruins of ancient civilizations continue fascinating us. They are not merely reminders of what was lost. They are reminders of what was achieved. They demonstrate humanity's ability to organize, create, cooperate, and imagine futures beyond a single lifetime. At the same time, they remind us that no achievement lasts unchanged forever. Cities rise. Cities decline. Empires expand. Empires fragment. Landscapes transform. Generations come and go. Yet human beings continue building, adapting, and dreaming. Across deserts, jungles, islands, river valleys, mountains, and coastlines, The civilizations we explored all shared one thing in common. Their people believed they were living in the present. They did not know they would become history. They simply woke each morning and continued their lives. Thousands of years later, we walk among their ruins and search for answers. Sometimes we find them. Sometimes mysteries remain. But perhaps the greatest answer is also the simplest. Ancient civilizations did not disappear because they were weak. Many were extraordinarily successful. They disappeared because change is one of the few constants in human history. The world shifts, conditions evolve, challenges emerge, and every generation must decide how to respond. Tonight, as our journey finally comes to an end, the ruins remain scattered across the earth. Temples rise above forests. Statues watch distant horizons. Palaces stand beneath desert skies. Silent streets cross forgotten cities. They wait patiently beneath sun, rain, wind, and stars, not as symbols of failure, but as reminders that every civilization, no matter how powerful, becomes part of a longer human story. And somewhere beyond the ruins, beyond the monuments, beyond the legends, the countless ordinary lives that built those worlds continue echoing through history, quietly reminding us that while civilizations may disappear, humanity's story never truly ends. If you want to continue the journey, the next video is waiting.